of the Transportation Circulation Committee. Can we please have a roll call?
Committee Member Blackerby.
Here.
Bosch.
Here.
Burnham.
Here.
France.
Here.
Horn.
Here.
Rodriguez.
Here.
Chair Kaufman-Gray.
Here. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, there are no changes to the agenda.
Okay. Is there any public comment for anything that is not on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Approval of the minutes from the October 23rd, 2014 TCC meeting.
I'd move approval.
Second.
We have approval and second. I have one comment or possible correction on page, it's very minor, page 5. For the approval motion, it says 5, and I believe there were 6 people that approved that, because on the following motion, it says 6 people approved.
Okay, we'll make that change.
Okay, great. Okay, we have a motion approved minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Move on to reports. The MTD report for October 2014. This is an informational item, Browning?
Yes, informational items, so it's just for the committee's information. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Any questions? Nope. Okay, just one comment for the public. There was a slight little decrease, not very much, but ridership has been pretty stable, I think, for the last few months. Okay, so we'll move on to the Sidewalk infill program.
Before we get to that item, I just want to, someone asked me this week, what was the best thing that happened in 2014? And, you know, I thought about it for quite some time, and the thing that I thought of that was the best thing that happened to me in 2014 was actually Peter Brown. and that's why I'm here to introduce to you our new mobility coordinator, Peter Brown, and he comes with a lot of experience working in larger cities, small cities, with different agencies. He has a very broad background in transportation planning, so he hit the streets running, so to speak, or bicycling, and he comes to us and has already done so much work as a temporary employee, getting the bike corral for one and doing many other things. And so it's just with great pleasure that he comes up and gives the next report that I introduce to you officially now, our mobility coordinator, Peter Brown.
Thank you, Rob, for that kind introduction. Chair Kaufman-Gray, members of the committee, Peter Brown with the Transportation Division. I believe it was Ms. Blackerby who asked about this program when we spoke about the CIP a couple of months ago. It was actually a good time to come back and talk about sidewalk infill, and for me as a new staff member to learn about the program. So you've all received the written report. I tried to do a couple of things, kind of remind the committee where we are in terms of the program, and a little bit of its program background, and when the program got adopted in 1998. The City Council, shortly after the circulation element adoption of that general plan, officially began the Sidewalk Infill Program. At that particular time, there were dedicated funds for the program, and there was a list, I believe, of over about 600 gaps in Santa Barbara's sidewalk network. Those gaps have been greatly reduced. We're going to talk about a few of those details in the next few minutes. But the other thing that happened over time, as many of you recall, is the city's income went way down along with a lot of other people's income and the county assessor's income. And one of the programs that took a hit was this one. And so I think going from about $400,000 a year up as recently as about 5 or 6 years ago, down to a $0 amount to fund this program from the city's specific budget. What we do have are still a lot of grant opportunities. We're going to talk about some of those and how successful the city has been. And then the street dollars that Mr. Allen manages are used primarily for matching funds. And I'd like to actually thank Committee Member France for sending me an email in advance and asking me some specific questions about how those match dollars work, and I'll explain those in a slide or two here. The only other thing I would point out in your report is the criteria. I think they're the bullet points on probably the second page of your report, that we still ask the same question. So the Transportation Planning Division works with engineering very closely on the analysis of the Sidewalk infill program, and we still ask the same questions, the ones that were adopted by council. Is the potential sidewalk on a school access route? I think that might have been me. Is the location currently being used by pedestrians? That is there a beaten path? Does the potential sidewalk lead to parks or rec areas? Is it a short gap to fill? Is it a location to a major destination or neighborhood? And the final two are, can it increase access to a transit stop or route? And what are the traffic volumes adjacent to the gap? So we still use those same criteria. The next section of your report kind of highlights some of the bigger projects that we've completed lately, and they're listed 1 through 4. And then we have 5 pretty interesting projects, 4 of which are from the Active Transportation Program that we recently received quite a bit of money from. About $4.5 million of the $8.2 million that the city received are categorized as sidewalk projects. So the slideshow I have for you today highlight some of those programs. So I believe you all received a handout that covers some of this accounting, so you don't need to squint too hard for this. But this basically answers the question of what kind of a match is the city paying? And right now the leverage rate is about 85%. So I looked at the projects that are in your staff report, the completed projects at the top, what the city's cost was of those projects versus the grant fund and the grant source. And then for the ones in design that we've recently received funds for, Measure A, and then the 3 Active Transportation Program projects, our match amount is even lower for those. But in the aggregate, when I averaged it, the city is paying about 14% of the cost of those particular projects, which to me is a great deal in terms of public resources. Another question that I got from Mr. France via email involved private development and how the city deals with private development projects when there are gaps in the sidewalk system adjacent to those new developments. The short answer is those are determined on a case-by-case basis based on the type of development that occurs and the nexus between the development and the sidewalk network. But I was able to pull up a couple of recent projects that were approved and the amount of lineal feet that was put in by the developer. And in this particular case, the city, of course, in order to grant approval, is conditioning that these sidewalks be built up to standard. And then the next few slides are just kind of some pictures of before and after. The Loma Alta Hill sidewalk was non-existent. There was a kind of a beaten path on the one side. On the other side, there was a guardrail. That's the picture on the left. And then on the right is the completed project with a brand new sidewalk. La Colina, as you can see on the left there, no sidewalk before the project, and after the project, the sidewalk has been infilled. The McKinley School sidewalk, a little bit interesting project. It's not a classic sidewalk. It's an asphalt pathway in this particular case, but it certainly is better than the prior condition. We did have an access ramp project in there, and I just wanted to give an example of one of those. You can see the ADA standards, since ADA was adopted in 1991, have changed, I think, 4 or 5 times. The standards that cities have to meet. And so one of the things that our engineering crew has to do is update when possible. And you can see on the left there, there's a full curb cut on the near side, and on the far side, no curb cut. And you can see the new improved condition on the right. La Cumbre is in design right now, so we've gone from the completed projects to projects in design. This is a Measure 8 grant-funded project, and it shows the dollar amounts there, and that's the existing condition. And one of our engineers, Eric Goodall, is working on that project. I got a lot of this information from him. And then here's the big pot of money that we've recently received, and I have some slides just to kind of orient and familiarize all of you with the program. and the pedestrian benefit. So on Lower Milpas and Calle Puerto Vallarta, we have a project that's going to improve and build sidewalks where they don't exist. Here's kind of a look at where those areas are. I believe the orange line is labeled sidewalk infill, and this is a very exciting project for the neighborhood here. The Montecito Street bridge replacement, you can see that top picture. It's a narrow bridge. I've been over it many times. There are no sidewalks there currently, but that will be a needed improvement on the east side. Again, the orange is indicating the places where we're doing sidewalk infill for the Montecito Street Bridge. This is the Cacique, Soledad, ped and bike bridges. There's currently one bridge there. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there will be two in the future. And so this is a project that's in design as well, thanks to the state money we competed for. And here's a look at the sidewalk infill portion of that, again in orange. And then the Las Positas Modoc multi-use path. I wouldn't call this a classic sidewalk infill project, but because it is a multi-use path and there will be plenty of people walking on it, we believe that this total project will cost between $10 and $15 million, but the amount of money we got, over $1 million from the state and with some city match, will help us do environmental clearance as well as design work for the Las Positas Modoc multi-use path. I did want to show one other thing, and that is the map with our ratings. Insufficient data for image. Were you able to or maybe we won't look at this. Is it saved to the hard drive, or is it still running from the flash drive? Okay. I think he was trying to show the full-size map of the city with the gridded areas. Okay, well, I think we may be in business here. I do need a hand, literally and figuratively. Okay, apologies for that. So the thing I wanted to show you all is what's in the queue. I believe many of you are aware, and I think Mr. Dayton spoke at your last meeting about the Mission Canyon Corridor Community Consensus Proposal. That is in design, and we're looking at options for that, and so that's highlighted. This map shows priority rankings. The redder or orange, the hotter the issue, the more ripe it is for funding. So that is one project that is being extensively looked at in a partnership between the city and county. In terms of the city's program and potential future sidewalk infill, I would say the next two projects are located here on Euclid. Euclid is located right here at the end of Valerio Street near Castillo. We will likely be applying for CDBG funds to fill in a sidewalk there in 2015. And then the next in the queue, rated the highest for our CDBG program, would be along Oak Park. There is no sidewalk for a long portion along Alomar here on one side of the street and then lower down on both sides of the street. So just to give you a heads up, based on the criteria adopted by council and what we're doing in the future, those will probably be the next two projects that we'll go after. So that concludes my presentation.
On the Euclid sidewalk, the council appropriated $100,000 for design money so we can apply for CDBG money in the future years. So the Euclid sidewalk is a project that we've asked engineering to do the design work, so we'll be ready to apply for the block grant money a year from now.
I'm just curious about which criteria the Euclid sidewalk meets.
Well, for CDBG, it meets our income requirements. It also has beaten path criteria. I'm not sure about all of the criteria, but I know that we ranked this in GIS and we applied all of the different criteria to it, and it's queued up. So.
Chairman Kaufman-Gray.
Yes, go right ahead.
Mr. Brown, thank you for your presentation. I was reading in the report that because of the decrease in city funds, that the funding for this infill program is either primarily or exclusively coming from grants of different types. Is that correct?
That's true as long as you're including the city match, which typically comes from our streets funds.
Okay, and so what is there some methodology or means that you and other staff will be pursuing grants that might yield some monies for this program?
Yeah, the interesting thing is when you bring grant funding in, you kind of have to move away from your strict criteria that the council adopted. In other words, you have to look at the grant program and what they're asking for. In the terms of the community development block grant program, a lot of times those are dealing with lower income areas, so then all of a sudden our focus becomes those neighborhoods. With the active transportation program, one of the criteria obviously is what your adopted PED master plan and bicycle master plan say. And so those are obviously are also filters for how we determine which projects and which funds we go after.
Thank you.
And the only other source of funds that we have available that we can go after grants is the Measure A, the regional Measure A monies that we have been successful receiving. And there's a PED bike portion of it, and there's also a Safe Route to School portion of it that we've been able to go after. So the Lacumba sidewalk that he mentioned is a Measure A funded through SB CAG. And so we use these criteria, and it's a Safe Route to School, there's a beaten path and all that. So we try and use the criteria as much as possible as it matches the grant application that we're going to be submitting.
Thank you.
Yes, any questions? Yeah, let's do questions and comments from the committee.
Well, I have
Ms.
a
Blackburn?
comment. The fact that, and this is sort of what I was wondering when I brought this up, when I asked to see this, was what's the deal with Oak Park? Because it's so hard to get at, which I've lived right near for almost 8 years, and friends of mine and myself, when I've had a stroller or friends in wheelchairs, getting into the park from the, I guess, State Street side of Oak Park is you go off-roading. And it's such a well-used park by families and people who, it's massive and it's impossible to basically get to without either walking in the street or on some kind of rough terrain. So I'm really excited about that because I think that'll be a huge benefit for a lot of folks that frequent the park, not just people who live in the neighborhood. And it's really great to see this map and kind of get a bigger picture of what we're dealing with. So I really appreciate you bringing this back so quickly.
Great. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Kaufman-Gray. Mr. Brown, thank you for the presentation and congratulations, and thank you for being the City of Santa Barbara's mobility coordinator.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to echo the comments of really being being pleased to see the different projects like Oak Park that are considered. I think there's a wide range of projects, and I think when we see the CIP and we see the $400,000 and in years past where some of those funds have been waived for the sidewalk infill, it's really relieving to see how diligently city staff has been leveraging that small pot of money, both through different grants, and also I was really pleased. I was just going to have a question for you. I was pleased that you're able to include on such a short time frame the projects that have had sidewalk infill as a part of them. And so your presentation really shows me that the city is really on it in terms of the sidewalk infill program, and I'm really pleased to hear it.
Well, I'm glad, and I appreciate your questions in advance. I won't say that they were quick to answer, but getting that information and the question in advance enabled me to pull the information together, so thank you for that.
Any other comments? Committee? Yes, go right ahead.
Mr. Brown, also, I was reading through the report. It said some of the challenges regarding some of the remaining projects. It mentioned something about how you integrate the infill with real property. And I was thinking particularly of where the street might be narrower, and if you fill in a sidewalk, does that cut into the easement of the property? What about how does this interface with, say, an area where there's vegetation and overgrowth? To how much do you cut into that to create a proper sidewalk, and of course the code for the width of the sidewalk regarding wheelchair access and that sort of thing. How does that all kind of fit together?
Well, I'll take a stab at answering that, and then I might have Mr. Allen chime in. But
kind of a loaded question.
No, that's okay. One of the things that one of the reasons why we referenced the real property issue was because there are certain neighborhoods, and I would just point out San Roque and the Riviera, where sidewalks are not there, and in going out into the community and asking folks who live there if the existing condition is okay with them, most of them do not want to see the sidewalk built.
Right.
So if we were to do it, indeed, without going below our minimum standard for fire access on our roadway widths, we would have to build sidewalks in folks' property owners' properties. So that's what that issue gets at.
Yeah, we do have areas in town where people have encroached into the public right-of-way, many times without having an encroachment permit, which makes putting a sidewalk in a little challenging. So the engineering staff has to work closely with the transportation staff, and we have to go out and talk to the property owners about the fact that they either have vegetation, maybe in some cases they've put a fence that needs to be moved so we can put the sidewalk in. But we just don't go in and bulldoze whatever they put in order to put the sidewalk in. We'll sit down and we'll chat with them and have a conversation with them and explain why it is that we're putting the sidewalk in.
Go ahead, Susan.
Hi. There was one picture in there that you showed that you said that engineering was going to start, and there was a big bush and a huge tree right in the middle of where a sidewalk would go. And I was just wondering, is that private property or is that city, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a La Cumbre project. Right. I think one of the things you'll notice as you stroll around town is that the city, at least in my opinion, as a relative newcomer here, has done a great job of preserving street trees and working pedestrian pathways around large mature trees. I know in speaking with the engineer, Mr. Goodall, on that project, he's talking with the city arborist right now about the health of that tree, its designation in the city, and I think every measure will be made to preserve it if possible. But again, those are case-by-case decisions, and I don't think we've come to the conclusion, because we're in design right now for that La Cumbre sidewalk, on what happens with that tree.
Could I just add a question? I'm thinking of a city tree that was put in on my street in front of some of the houses, city trees, and I'm trying to figure out, is there, from the curb over, is there sometimes a green space where there are plantings and then sidewalk, or is the sidewalk always like right next to the curb?
Committee Member Horn, we typically call that a parkway, and that is an area between the edge of the face of the curb and where the sidewalk begins. And there are many places in town where we have parkway. And then I believe there's also other places where the sidewalk goes right up to the front of the curb. So that condition changes depending on which part of the town you're in.
We look at, see how much right-of-way we have, what's already existing, and if we can't put a parkway in and then the sidewalk, we try and do that to give a little buffer between the street and where the pedestrians will be walking. I mean, you go in the commercial area and you won't see parkways for the most part. You'll see the sidewalk up to the curb, but we also have street furnishing, whether it be benches or trash cans or whatever, that gives somewhat of a buffer for the pedestrians.
Yeah, and my street, which is just 1 block long, the city trees that were put in very close to the curb. So I figure they must be planning on a parkway if eventually, a sidewalk goes in there.
It's possible. We'd have to take, yeah.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any comments? I just have a couple comments. Well, first of all, thank you so much for putting this report together. I mean, we just had our meeting last month, and you were able to come back with us with this, and really appreciate it. The question is, okay, the city is doing a wonderful job of leveraging grants and to get these projects where we would not have these projects going, which is really great news. Is this going to be the wave of the future instead of trying to put money in the CIP just for sidewalk infill, or are we just going to realize that there's really no money, we never can do that anymore, so we're just going to be doing by grant basis to get these projects done that need to be done?
Well, the answer to your question, for the foreseeable future, is going to be strictly going after grants. We, in terms of being able to maintain our infrastructure, we don't have enough money to do that. So, as you think John mentioned at the last meeting, John Wozniak, that the council has his infrastructure financing committee, subcommittee, they're working on ways where we can identify how we can fund capital improvement for our city infrastructure. It'd be roads, sidewalk, as well as our buildings and parks. And so we have a huge need for capital money, and until we can come up with another funding source, all we're going to be able to do is go after grants and try and be as aggressive as we can in seeking grant funding.
Yeah, well, I think this is working. I mean, you seem to be doing really well with this. I'm just, when you get to little projects, though, which really a grant might not do that. I'm wondering if there's going to be some small little projects that might go by the wayside because, we're going after the bigger projects and maybe missing one street that has 2 houses without a sidewalk for 3 blocks or something. I mean, that's a hypothetical question.
That's something we can take a look at. We do have what's called Transportation Development Act funds that we get. It's like $65,000 a year that could be used for something like that. But right now, that's part of the funds that we use for matching funds for the grants that we go after.
No, I think this is, it's working. I mean, it's great. We're getting a lot of projects done that wouldn't get done at all, So thank you for pursuing all of these grants. Yes, go ahead.
You referred to, in the beginning of your talk, you said there were this many hundred feet or something, or areas of infill that needed to be done, and that it had changed by now. I just wondered what the difference was now, like how many places are left now to do infill in?
I did not calculate that
number, okay.
So I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
But what I would point you to, and I think this is pretty interesting, it also gets to the point that Chair Kaufman Gray made, and that's spend a little time with the maps that were provided, these PDF maps. They show where the gaps are in the city. And what's interesting to me when I studied it is there are not a lot of gaps remaining. So that tells me that the city over the last 20, 30 years, I don't know how long this program's been going on, has done a pretty good job of closing those gaps. The remaining gaps are going to be most successfully funded with grant money, as Mr. Allen just pointed out. And the Community Development Block Grant Program is one that targets low-income neighborhoods. And so that's, I would say, the west side is kind of ripe. You can see a lot of yellow and orange over here. Euclid we talked about. Again, all of this area up here, either in the Riviera or up here in San Roque, we're not probably going to go after money for those projects for both community desire and eligibility. But again, there's not a lot of linear feet left to close is the short answer on that.
Thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you so much for bringing this report. Okay, we'll move on to the status of the bicycle master plan.
Chair Kaufman-Gray, members of the committee, brief update here. Really good news. We have a contract that City Council awarded on Tuesday to the Melendrez Landscape Architecture and Urban Design Firm. They're based out of Los Angeles. They come pretty highly recommended to us. They've teamed with Fair and Peers, who also has been managing a lot of our traffic analysis and city traffic model. So they're very familiar with the city. And as many of you are aware, the focus of the Bicycle Master Plan update will remain on seeking community input from every member of the community that's interested in participating, and specifically from 5 groups that we've identified, one of which, of course, are people who are interested in cycling. But we also want to talk to property owners who live on current or proposed bike facilities, the business community, transit riders, and folks who typically drive for most of their trips. There's a lot of reason to believe that in the bike planning community, the urban planning community, that really well-designed bicycle facilities can benefit all transportation users. So that is the tact that we're going after. We have a kickoff meeting next week with the consultants, so we're starting right away. And we should be moving forward in January and February, and likely have our first community meeting in February or March of next year.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, it looks like that concludes. Yes.
Actually, Mr. Kaufman-Gray, if I could just make a quick comment on this item.
Yes.
Thank you. It's great to hear that the RFP process is going, and it sounds like Melendrez is a good firm. I'd just like to share, I'm beaming over the Sidewalk infill program. I think you all have been doing a great job. I think it's interesting thinking about this next year's process with the Bicycle Master Plan. We talk about sidewalk infill, we talk about closing the gaps, and nobody's questioning the need for closing the gaps for sidewalk where it's not there. And it is, the city process, I think you all have gotten some good input from our city leaders about the need to really go out into different subgroups in the Santa Barbara community and solicit feedback. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of quantifiable value added, just like having a great sidewalk network, just like having a great bikeway network. And I really hope within the public engagement process that a lot of that is data-oriented. So we're not asking people, what do you think about bikeways? Just like you could ask people, what do you think about sidewalks? Should we have sidewalks? Should we not have sidewalks? No. What's the value of having a comprehensive sidewalk network? What's the value of having a comprehensive bikeway network? I think that's the question the community has to ask. And thank you all for diligently pursuing the Bike Master Plan.
Committee Member France, I will just say I am a data-driven person, and I believe the way our RFP was written and the way the proposal has been responded, we will take your advice and we will look at a lot of hard numbers to make our analysis concrete and defensible.
Okay.
Okay, a couple of announcements. Tuesday, the City Council reappointed Committee Member Blackerby. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Porn and Rodriguez.
Yay.
On a sad note, this is Chair Kaufman-Gray's last meeting as a member of the TCC. And I believe you are probably the longest serving member of the TCC since the committee was established by council.
Yeah, 12 years.
12 years on this committee. So I want to personally thank you for your service on the committee over the past 12 years, and wish you well, and be looking at other opportunities for other city committees. I mentioned to you when we had coffee last week, right. We're looking for a member of the Downtown Parking Committee, so if that's something you'd like to do.
Need you there.
Unfortunately, we will be one member short for the next 6 months till the next recruitment period, because we only had three people showed up for the interviews, and it's our 3 standing members. So we'll be 6 members for a while until the next recruitment period. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Committee Member Blackerby.
Well, we wanted to, thank you for your many years of service on the committee. That's no small feat. And I know it was great to have you here since I've been on, as kind of institutional memory of remembering things of like, we dealt with this a decade ago and now it's finally getting done and things like that. And that's always really helpful to have that perspective. And so just wanted to thank you for and I'll get fingerprints on this, but your commitment and your many years of service to the TCC. So you can always come back and visit us and or just stay home and watch on TV.
Public comment,
Come to public comment. But anyway, we wanted to
thank you very much. Wow, thank you. No, I just want to thank everybody in the city for, every time these reports that you bring to us, all the work you have to do these presentations, I think a lot of times we take that for granted. And, we ask these tough questions and the city will turn around just like what happened just with the sidewalk infills. You do the research and bring it back. And I've been amazed all the time I've been on this committee how over the years, you keep responding to us with our tough questions. And, I've learned so much. I have no background in transportation, but, through my volunteering for different committees, like this, the Enhanced Transit Subcommittee I was on, the lighting committee for the lights in the city. I've learned so much over the years, and anybody that's out there that's thinking about joining a committee, I really recommend you to do it because it's really, you learn so much about the city of Santa Barbara and how it works. And I think it's, we give input, but it takes the whole residents of the community to be involved to make the city as great as it is. So anyway, thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. And I adjourn this meeting.
Once again you stop and mingle in the spirit of Christmas.